This is not the end, but it is the end of the beginning. Welcome to the fallen, borderless, drugged, groomed, jabbed, propagandized, catamite, pedophile, pushers and pimps, surveillance states of Nazi America. These are the long, new dark ages of the Great Reset. We will win, but it will be long in coming. Having forgot history and reliance on Creator, we have hard lessons to relearn and remember. The Roman Republic, replaced by corrupt regime, defeated by martyred Christendom, took 300 years to fall, longer than American has been, but not longer than the Turtle Island tribes. Despite their desperation and decimation, in their seventh generation, the tribes are rising again from the 7 feet of earth that is the dust of their ancestors. As Tachumke Witko, Crazy Horse dreamed, the red race will rise again and be a blessing for a sick world, and a lesson for us all. The bitter truths of Trails of Tears teaches, in the coming new dark ages, just existence is resistance. Revenge is the Lord's, but resistance begets resilience. And in resilience is reconciliation. And in reconciliation is redemption. A retired soldier, special agent spy, turned whistleblower warrior, served and sabotaged, rejected and redeemed, failed and forgiven, betrayed and saved, rejecting revenge, humbled and blessed, repurposed in redemption. As chaplain, leader, teacher, and truth teller. Now your intelligence officer, following God, leading my family, and any that choose to join on our long walk to faith and freedom. Welcome. I'm Jeff Prather, and this is the Prather Point. Welcome, everybody. Happy to be with you for the Calculating the Coming Class event. It's filled, so you can still register there for that. Got some very special guests today. Before I get to those, a couple Rumble Rant remarks from our government wants us dead. Arkansas Spark 22 says biker gangs cartels are no longer infiltrated by LE. They all found it's less costly to hire a PI to perform deep background checks on new recruits than pay huge defense attorney fees after charged with RICOs. I suggest militias, vigilantes, cult survival groups do the same. Well, we're not a militia, vigilante, or cult, but that's a great idea. Team America does do that, and I actually worked with the ATF undercover Jay Dobbins, who tatted up and infiltrated the Hells Angels back in the day. And then, of course, I worked with the other hero whistleblowers at ATF, John Dotson and Vince Shafalou on the Fast and Furious that I was on the DEA side of as well. But that's a great point. Good thinking on your part. Sherry0947 says CPS is trafficking children using Social Security money to sell babies and children and pedos. That's very true. You know, I came out of St. Joseph's Orphanage, product of rape, and that's certainly happening in Ohio. Harry the Greek has covered that in great detail, and Peter Strzok was involved in all of that. And she says, Jesus, please cover them with your saving blood. Amen, Major Prather. God bless your good work, praying. And Dr. Atohi says, thank you for helping people. I am so grateful to you. God bless you. Trying to do my best doing that. And in an effort to do my best, I'm bringing on some really heavy hitters in the intelligence circle that I should have had on earlier and was not able to do that. But this is Douglas Gabriel and Michael McKibben of American Intelligence Media, and they have the CAT report, which is Christians Addicted to Truth. And I found their work fascinating, and I was already learning a lot from them, and it looks like I've got a lot more to learn. But welcome, gentlemen, to the Prather Point. So thanks for coming on, and my apologies for messing things up before. I ask your forgiveness, and you know I'm here to learn about all of your great work.
Well, nice to be here. You mean you don't control the weather? I understand you had a thunderstorm issue.
Yeah, we get the sun. It's clearing up now, though. And so you were NSA, and Douglas, you were 101 Airborne Ranger at Bragg. Wow, that's I was at Bragg back in the 80s. That's you guys got a cool pedigree background. Yep. But please kind of introduce yourselves and go over your backgrounds a little bit.
Yeah, they worked us hard down there. I was in the NSA for, of course, I was in the military, drafted in 1972 by the lottery, and was chosen to go into the NSA through the Army Security Agency. And about the last 9 months, they found that the 101st Airborne readiness group was not ready. They couldn't communicate between one side and another, so they sent one of their teachers, that was me, down from Fort Devens down to Fort Bragg, and there I spent the last 9 months or so working with the readiness group. And because I was already a parachuter, they quickly made me a airborne ranger, kicked me out of an airplane, as you full well know, with nothing but a knife. And if you live through that, then you get to join the group. So yes, I've had a little bit of colorful background with military, but essentially we run our site as a truth history site. So we're not only just geopolitical, we also have many other branches that go into multiple sites. My wife, Tyla Gabriel, is a naturopathic doctor, and we try to inform people about truth, no matter how hard it hurts when they hear it.
Excellent, excellent. How about you, Michael?
Well, after graduating from Ohio State in civil engineering, I grabbed my weapon, a trombone, and went on the road with a gospel music group for 10 years. And in the process of doing that, I traveled and worked in 27 different countries, including a lot of work in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union during the Brezhnev era. So I had a totally different experience from the military. Although every once in a while, when we were in communist countries, various embassy people would come to us and say, you may need this, and would give me their card. But we were just 20 somethings trying to preach the gospel and do our part to spread love in the world. And then I completely changed my direction, went into management consulting, and organizational development, problem solving, did that and got an opportunity to rebuild AT&T's email system. So I moved my consulting into software development. We rebuilt AT&T's email system at the time that Windows 95 was coming along. And in the process of doing that, I began to see an Achilles heel in what AT&T and IBM were doing in the realm of large-scale communication. So rather than just give them my idea, I say I went underground. I didn't literally go underground, but we stopped telling people what we were doing. And I hired a crack team of programmers that I would have put up against anybody at Sun or Microsoft or IBM. And we started looking at what was wrong with large scale collaboration as the internet was beginning to emerge. And there were certain beliefs among the major players of the way that was going to happen. And I could see that that wasn't going to happen that way. So, and I'm talking about people, IBM, Microsoft, Sun Microsystems, Novell, AT&T. They were all going down a mechanism for collaboration called groupware, and I could see that that was going to fail. And so we then started inventing, and in late 1999, we had the magic aha moment. And I went to Washington, was advised to talk with a particular professor that was advising the White House, the Congress, most major corporations, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, everyone you can think of. And he agreed to be my patent attorney. And we started working on the patents, which we now have 3. And that technology is called social networking. Now, what we now know, which we didn't know then, obviously, was that our software was so interesting to these players that they determined that they had to have it. And I did not know that my patent attorney was also the chief technical advisor to an organization in Europe, in the city of London, called the Pilgrim Society. And I have since discovered that if you want to know who the deep state is, it's the Pilgrim Society in the city of London. It's British. It always has been. And we can go into that in terms of the implications of that and a lot of the understandings that people have. But when you hear stories of Hammer and Scorecard or LifeLog, or those were all propaganda stories that they floated at the same time as they stole our technology. And they formed an organization called the IBM Eclipse Foundation with $40 million of donated money from IBM. And then they've invited all the Silicon Valley players to join that organization. My patent attorney secretly stole our source code. I won't get into that. It was an escrow. And within 11 weeks, our software was out in the market all over the place. So by 2004, our technology was the base code for all of social media across the board. So this site is using my technology, and pretty much anybody that's logging into any kind of site is using my technology, my invention. We eventually got 3 patents for this, and then we decided to sue Facebook for patent infringement in 2008. And in 2010, we received a split verdict. We proved unequivocally through a battle of experts that Facebook was infringing our patent on 11 of 11 claims. But then we watched the federal courts. Did you hear that in the background? Okay, I'm hearing echo in the background. But then we watched the federal courts circle the wagons around Facebook. I then said, let's keep going. We went all to the Supreme Court. John Roberts wouldn't hear the case. And then we discovered that all of the judges in our case, going back to the district court, had mountains of Facebook stock. And this was prior to the Facebook initial public offering. And then in addition to that, we said, obviously that's illegal what they did, but they were getting away. They were giving themselves permission to get away with it. And by the way, this was in the entire time of 9/11, of the Patriot Act. My attorney was secretly involved with that whole operation. Some of the things you've mentioned in your background were all a part of this theft of social media. So this social media technology, my invention, was stolen by a group called the Highlands Group, which was this fascist association between the Department of Defense and certain military industrial complex players like Raytheon and Boeing and the like. And it was weaponized. So that's what we've discovered over 10 years of investigation, because we decided we were going to prove that this was true. And we have hard evidence that's judicially recognizable. And I'm probably shocking some people, because they think this guy named Zuckerberg, when he was a sophomore studying for finals, developed the entire social media structure in a couple of weeks, right? That's what the social networking movie was about. That was another one of the PSYOP stories of propaganda. So they floated 4 different stories about how social media was created. And as we can see today, everybody's confused, because some people hear LifeLog, or some people hear Hammer and Scorecard, or some other people hear other stories. There's a couple of others that are out there. But that's what we've discovered. Who stole our technology. Now, moving forward, we said, okay, we now know who did it. What we decided to do is, how could we fix this problem? Because as everybody knows, propaganda is pushed worldwide now through social media. That is the major mechanism of these bad boys that are running our government, mainly the banks, British banks, and their lackeys in the U.S. How are they getting away with this? And so we actually put a lien on, I won't go into the legal details, there's some different terms, but basically a lien on the federal government, specifically the executive branch. And we said, look, guys, you stole it, we can prove it, now we want paid. And so that number, when you actually capitalize the entire value of social networking in the world, is easily $7 trillion. So we've said, look, we proposed a mechanism for getting paid, getting my shareholders paid, who had put in a total of over $20 million in development cash, and have never been paid a dime, with 2 exceptions. Both are from Michigan, and people who decided to voluntarily pay a license to us. But bottom line is, we've said, That's a lot of money. We don't need $7 trillion. So we will take the bulk of this cash. We will issue vouchers and allow the citizens of the United States to take these vouchers and invest it in whatever media outlet is their choice. So we have a solution. But as we can see right now, the banks are crashing. So this solution is only going to work after the crash occurs. I'm going to stop there.
And Michael
Well,
found out very quickly, Jeff, that I was doing an intelligence report on patent theft and found out that over 4,000 inventors were killed when they were asked to turn their patents over to the government for basically national security. Anytime you hear the words national security, you should just read into that that is treason. And so
Right.
basically they couldn't get Michael to, they wanted to know what else he was going to invent. So they've not targeted him as much as they've targeted others. But as you know, if you have an invention, you better be careful that it's not going to be stolen by the government for national security purposes, weaponized and used against the very people you were trying to help. So when Michael's invention started to be rolled out, isn't it interesting that General Freeze came along, a person who was a major intelligence person, and got on his board. So out of the woodwork, all of a sudden you had the top lawyer in America, a man who literally writes the laws for the Congress to pass, Professor Chandler, as well as many other people who were very military. People don't know that in the beginning, the internet was a system to connect colleges and the military to create weapons. That's where most of the money goes, is to colleges for research, is for weaponization of stolen patents. And so once you realize this, you understand that innovation is not driven by need. It's not driven by morality. Nothing about it is Christian. There's nothing about it that is going to help anybody. These are weapons. So when the internet was created, the first thing they did was create the dark web for gambling and for pornography. And who ran that? The CIA. It was all ran through, it used to be called Cisco. Now it's been divided up into different groups. But the patent office is taken over by a British group called Serco. And then Cisco, which of course also had its British foundations, literally filtered everything that went through the internet to begin with. And it was an experiment, a PSYOPs experiment that became so successful that it sucked up all of our commerce. It sucked up our ability to think. And now with things like ChatGPT, you don't even have the ability to think once you give your soul over to the devil, because these are indeed weapons of mass destruction of your thinking, of your feeling, and controlling your world. And now what do we see? Silicon Valley Bank. Those are all cardboard cutouts who are people representing the stolen patents, most of which were demanded by DARPA. Go to DARPA's site. Every year they make a list of what it is they want invented, and it is the most nefarious, horrible things you've ever heard of in your life. They all do get invented, and then the same venture capitalists create a government/corporate monopoly, and that's what we're living in. We're living in a digital monopoly where, just like they say when they ask a Chinese man, what do you think of the Chinese social credit? He says, without it, you can't take a single step. You can't have a single thought. And that's where we're at now. And Michael's plan is to undo that, go back to the legal ramifications, and turn it over so that the government acknowledges that these patents were stolen by IBM, of course, one of the greatest corrupt corporations on the face of the earth, has been since its inception. They supported the Nazis, Hitler's Nazis. They kept track of all of the people in the concentration camps. And so now IBM Eclipse Foundation, literally, one could say they are the biggest thieves in human history.
Wow, that's very informative. And I think you can make an analogy with COVID. We initially thought China and Wuhan, but then we go back and see it's Dietrich, Harvard. And now we see, like I've had Sasha Latipova saying, the military requested a crisis for all of this. There's the crisis in Parliament on January 6th. So that fits the pattern of activity. What you're saying, except what you're saying is on a much, much bigger scale. But if you would, Michael, go back to the Pilgrim Society and tell me more about that. I really want to learn and understand that better.
Well, I had no idea who they were when I was inventing or trying to figure out who stole it. I wanted to know because I'm a civil engineer. I like fixing problems. I like understanding how things work, or when they don't work, what's causing it. And we kept seeing these pieces of evidence pop up, that all these British connections with our military industrial complex. And for the longest time, it was quite confusing because there were lots of people, they talked about lots of things, and there was a lot of misdirection in this information. So we just started, like a good jigsaw puzzle, we would identify a piece of evidence and put it on the table. And we kept doing that for years after the Supreme Court wouldn't protect us. And so for many years, we did not see who was really the driving force underneath all these things that we were having happen to us out of our government. So we could see our government misdirecting. Hillary, for example, cut a secret deal with Facebook during our trial. Now, that's called obstruction of justice, but she hid it in her private server. And only thanks to Judicial Watch did we ever get a view of this. And we then found that she had private GSA contracts where she had paid Facebook in 2009 for a template for winning elections as Secretary of State. So there you go. Election interference. We have hard proof that Hillary did it with our technology. And she basically interfered in our entire legal case. So, but we discovered that she's not her own person, that she's directed by somebody. So the next phase of that was we discovered this group called the Senior Executive Service, which most people kind of may vaguely know about, but it's 10,000 senior executives that are hired into the federal government. And we've dug into the primary sources of these documents. And we discovered that this group of 10,000, is paid by the judicial branch. It is paid by 300 attorneys out of the judicial branch. And the other key piece of this is in their own documents, they say they don't, even though they're paid by the executive branch, they don't report to the president. So we started to say, well, who do they report to? Then we discovered a group called the Crown Agents, which are operating across the US. These work for the British monarch, the British Crown. And then we started looking back in time. Douglas mentioned our first director was Major General James Freeze. We then discovered through some NSA releases recently that he was the general of the Army Security Agency, which became the NSA, that authorized the Project Echelon, which, what's his name, first revealed, Snowden, that my director was the guy who authorized the surveillance of Americans by our military and our intelligence agency. That we said, okay, that's not good. And then we kept marching back in time to 1946. And 1946 was the kiss of death for American sovereignty. If we hadn't already given over our sovereignty, it was given over at the end of the war in an agreement on March 5th of 1946 called Five Eyes. We call it Five Eyes now. Back then, it just had no name. But it was an agreement between the military intelligence agency, the Army Security Agency, the FBI, with British MI6, MI5, and GCCS, which became GCHQ, that all intelligence throughout the world was going to be shared with the British. All of our intelligence. We gave up our sovereignty as a country. If we didn't have it before, we certainly didn't have it after. And in the same day that March 5th, 1946, go look it up, Truman was traveling with Churchill in Kansas and actually announced this special relationship that America had engaged in with Britain. The same day. And there we saw that the intelligence world that we thought we had, the FBI, CIA, NSA, was all subject to the British intelligence agencies. And we go back before that, the OSS, that it was British run. We think it was American run. No, it was British run. OSS, all the intelligence during the war, they had all these stay behind agents all over the planet. These guys were raping and pillaging the entire world and planning our new economy through something called the Marshall Plan. And they've engaged, all these banks have engaged in the wealth that they have now through the Marshall Plan. And then we discovered, I can't remember how we first discovered it, but we discovered a censored document. And it was a document that cataloged a meeting that the British had in 1909 called the Imperial Press Conference. It was June 5th to June 28th of 1909. And it was a meeting of a group called the Pilgrim Society. We didn't, what's that? We then discovered later it was the brainchild of Cecil Rhodes. But the Imperial Press Conference essentially defined how future media, newspapers, later radio and television, were going to handle propaganda. And this is in their words, they were going to create public opinion. And they had a number of people that were running that organization. And one of them was W.T. Stead, who had written a paper called Government by Journalism. These guys who had just previously set up the British South Africa Company as the world's first fascist corporation. And this was involving Lord Rothschild, Cecil Rhodes, Lord Rosebery, who was a Rothschild by inheritance. He inherited the N.M. Rothschild fortune, and Baron Henry de Worms, Pirbright Institute. We won't get off in that, but that's basically biowarfare, where the British really focused on biowarfare. So we had the banks and all their key agencies were focused on how they were going to build this new world order. And if you go to Cecil Rhodes's biography, he laid it out there how they were going to do it. And he said it was going to take them 200 years. We're 120 years into that 200-year plan. But basically, in 1902, Cecil Rhodes had just died prematurely in his early 60s. And so they moved their agenda forward and they created something called the Pilgrim Society. And this was the group that basically organized World War I, World War II. Every major military activity in the world has been financed out of this Pilgrim Society. And yet, when you read about it, there's a lot of propaganda out there. It's all over the map, a lot of misdirection. We took the time, years, to study this. We found this Imperial Press Conference document. It was a document about 250 pages that laid it out. We found it magically in a library, kind of like Indiana Jones. It was stuck off in a warehouse. This organization and this meeting has been written out of our modern history. Now we know why, because some of the organizers of the Pilgrim Society included Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, one other key player, J.P. Morgan. And they were specifically tasked by the Pilgrim Society to finance all editorial control of American newspapers and publishing and libraries, because that was a major source of international information back in the day. And they were specifically charged with making sure that the story of their founding was never in the psyche of America. And they have been successful. And that is the Pilgrim Society. So when somebody wants to know who the deep state is, we know it's not this magical group of so many organizations like the Bilderberg and World Economic Forum and Aspen Institute and Bohemian Grove. Yes, those are all players, but the source of that energy, of that mentality, is in London, in the city of London, and it's called the Pilgrim Society. And the other thing we've learned about this group, they are not Christians, they are not Jews, they are Babylonian pagans, and they're dedicated to it. Pagans, Babylonian pagans, committed to child sacrifice, to usury, and to slavery. And they have been about that agenda now for many centuries. I know that's a lot of information.
No, that's great. And that makes a lot of sense because they're obsessed with killing the unborn babies, killing the born babies. They're just obsessed. I mean, the Grammys, which I don't watch, it's got the satanic thing with Pfizer sponsoring. I mean, you can certainly see all the dots. And, and from,
yes.
My little whistleblowing, where I found out that my attorneys were working for the G as well. That makes total sense. But I guess, Douglas, with the stealing of the social network, then that really has acted as an accelerant for all of their plans, because now they can control all those devices. And so the propaganda is much better than, loudspeakers or leaflets or anything like that. It's much
That's right.
more control.
Right. Now, remember that Cecil Rhodes used money from the old British East India Company and the British South Africa Company. That's how he got started. So he didn't start off as the richest man in the world, and he ripped off all the gold and the diamonds from there. He attacked the Transvaal with 2 wars, and the second war was actually his assistant, Alfred Milner. But the point is that these 4 rich people, 3 Rothschilds and Cecil Rhodes, had an assistant, W.T. Stead, who was going to be the media control, in other words, the propaganda control. So they laid out their plan just as Michael has described it. And then a magical thing came along, Nikola Tesla. And Nikola Tesla, with his advances, then were stolen by a British group, and they used a cardboard cutout named Marconi. And then they basically began to control the propagation of any electromagnetic frequencies, whether it be by wire or wireless. And essentially, they knew from the beginning, because General Sarnoff, who Michael can tell you about, said that when they open up radio broadcasting, it will be the greatest weapon ever created on the face of the earth. It will be able to kill instantaneously. So when people are worried about 5G, we should have been worried about 1G, 2G, 3, and 4G, because they knew that it was a weapon. They knew it was going to kill people. The Spanish flu is nothing more than the propagation of the electrical wires that cause the illness, and the mixture with a vaccine that they created in America. So when the vaccines come out, they oftentimes come out with the next level of electromagnification of the world, which causes all kinds of electrosensitivity, stress, illness. So our modern world has been simply propagated by people like the Rothschild family, who, in a hidden way, has controlled Reuters since the beginning, and Reuters Thompson now. So if you're going to be really rich and you're going to be the big bankers, there's going to be a few agendas that you have. And we have found the list of Lillian Scott Torrey basically pointing at what we know to be the list today. What's the first thing on their list? Control of the world through banking, through fractional banking, through usury, through taxes. The original Babylonian Radonites were in control of all the land of the king, in control of all the taxes. They were in control of all the banking, and they started basically the extreme use of putting people in prison when they owed money, which then started to control all of our lives, which goes back literally to 2000 BC, when they began to develop through the Hammurabi Code, debtor's prison, and the power of the money. So when the bankers, Radonite Babylonians, which then, of course, that's what the Rothschilds are. They're Radonite Babylonians. They aren't Jews. They're not Hebrews. They are what is called in the book of Revelation, fake Jews of the synagogue of Satan. And they were, just as Michael said, they continue to this very day, as you hear in supposed conspiracy theories, to kill children, to drink their blood, to want to wipe out 6 billion or 6.5 billion people on the earth. Why? Because they, as elites, believe that they need to inherit the earth without us here eating up their resources, even though they control many of the resources of the world. And still to this very day, the monarchy, and remember, the monarchy was created by what? And I this is a derogatory term, but it's always been in history. The court Jew. The court Jew was always the banker. The court Jew was always in charge of the money that created wars. And they loaned money to both sides to create the wars. Matter of fact, we know that they fomented war. But the deal is, we think that yellow journalism was started by Hertz and Pulitzer. That's nothing. That's child play compared to the type of propaganda that has been disseminated by first Cecil Rhodes' group, sometimes called the Round Table, and then it became Milner's Kindergarten, and then it became the Chatham House, and then became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and in America we call it the Council on Foreign Relations.
And all those are Pilgrim Society.
That's the point. The Pilgrim Society flies under the false flag as a dinner group to welcome ambassadors to countries. The ambassadors to foreign countries are the biggest criminals on the face of the earth. You only get appointed to one of the criminal states like Ukraine if you are a treasonous traitor who is a worshiper of mammon, of money. And what are you willing to do for that? You're willing to worship Moloch. You're willing to kill people. Like, look at the corruption in Ukraine that was happening through the Bidens, through Hunter Biden on the Burisma board, through George Soros being on the largest board for natural gas and oil in Ukraine. You have Cofer Black, who is Mitt Romney's basic number one man, his lieutenant. You have Christopher Hines. You have Pelosi's relatives. You have all of the politicians in Ukraine giving a Heil Hitler to some of the original Nazis. They're not neo-Nazis. They were original Nazis, and people forget that. So what we see happening right now is all a continuation that has started off as propaganda and turned into theater of the absurd. So it's the propaganda, for instance, the SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. It's all propaganda. You could take that into pieces and you will find that every person who invested in that bank, that was an insider tip because they were told what was going to happen, that it would be the most protected of the banks. And remember, every one of these people that stole Michael's inventions, they're a cardboard cutout. They're idiots. Elon Musk is an idiot. Just listen to him. Listen to Mark Zuckerberg. He's got an IQ of about 70. Listen to Peter Thiel, who just led the crash of Silicon Valley Bank. This is the power and the control of technology that is stolen from patents, weaponized by the military, and basically goes to the Highlands Group, which is a transnational group. It's an international group. We pay for it. The taxpayers paid for all of this. Elon Musk, 40% of the money Elon Musk had to develop his companies now, those are our tax dollars. And so we don't know in America who people are because they call them the generic deep state. We call it the Senior Executive Service is the group that is really the shadow government. We know that the Highlands Forum and In-Q-Tel, that really is the innovators of globalism. And the World Economic Forum, it's just another group. Charles, it's the British monarchy who started the World Economic Forum. People want to say Klaus Schwab did it. Klaus Schwab's family was given awards by Hitler for being the best Nazi industrialist of the time. And Klaus Schwab is in that family. Anthony Fauci, his family basically were the people who held the monopoly on talc, or talcum powder as we call it, which for 20 years has been in court proving that it is a carcinogen, but they fought it all along. So half the pills that you take, if they're a pill, have a poisonous talc in them. But what is this supposed to do? This is depopulation. The Pilgrim Society were the premier eugenicists and depopulationists, using every single tool imaginable. And Lord Pirbright, the Pirbright Institute is the one who actually started
the Rothschild.
He was a Rothschild. And we know that in the Muriel Animal Hospital and Kinetic. We have proven by simply going back with mountains of circumstantial evidence to demonstrate how this was released. It was not released by the Chinese. It was released by the British. And this is not the first time they've done it. They've been doing it since the time of Cecil Rhodes and the Pirbright Institute, and the fact that the rich people in the world want to kill the rest of us because they just see us as
Can I
useless
give you an
eaters.
example, a historical example? Maybe people have heard of the Opium Wars in China,
Yeah, no, I was
and
thinking
that
about that.
and so here we have the British who are importing opium from Turkey and secondarily India to the Chinese and getting the Chinese high on opium to the point where the emperor of China said, stop that. And the British fought 2 wars to make it possible for them to keep importing opium. So let me ask you something. If that's the British heart, then do they have any problem with slavery or child sacrifice or anything else? No, they're about murder to preserve their banking prowess throughout the world. And they've been at it since before the formation of the British East India Company, which was in 1600. Our heritage on the East Coast comes out of that. And if you look at Boston, Boston was built on opium and slaves from back in the 1600s. We've tracked all that down. The Levant Company, uh, what we have is hard evidence, not hearsay, that all these things that we're talking about right now are true. And we've dug into archives all over the world, libraries all over the world, and so what we're trying to do is help people understand a lot of this misdirection that occurs because it is very confusing. And yet now that's a part of the propaganda mechanism. Throw out 3 or 4 subjects, gaslight all day long, so that most people won't take the time to dig into this. We have, and that's what Douglas refers to as truth history.
We call it judicially recognizable evidence because on Michael's site, Americans for Innovation, you will find more evidence to convict all of these people. You plug in someone's name, you will find more evidence than it needs to put them in jail or to basically hang them. Let's just call it hang them from the tree of liberty, because that's where that needs to be their fate. But this is really a battle that's been going on for a long time. And unfortunately, people are not aware of it. And so we created a thing called Truth History. I don't know how many pages we have in our Truth History uh, texts, but the point is if you read them, you will find out all about it. But it's just like what happened with you and Fast and Furious. Eric Holder was never prosecuted. They waited until the statute of limitation ran up before they even began to investigate. So what happens? Nothing happens. Why? Because the globalists are really transnationalists. They are the ones who are the leaders of our biggest corporations in America. They pay no taxes. They put it in offshore accounts. And basically, they rule the world. 65% of the wealth of America leaves America without taxes being asked to be paid. They're not even asked. The IRS, of course, knows these people. George Soros and his quantum hedge fund never paid a single penny of taxes. Not long ago, he took, what was it? How many billions of dollars and put it into non-government organizations, which are all left-wing democratic groups. Well, they're not even supposed to have any political motivation. And yet this happens all the time. So is it going to stop? Unfortunately, I believe we're at the end of America's dream of a democratic capitalism. First off, it's not capitalism. There's no free markets. They're all controlled, and we are not a democracy. We are a republic. But unfortunately, our republic is controlled by judges and the people who run the 56 federal agencies, the senior executive service members, who are, in fact, that is a shadow government. And there's no 2 ways around it. But we can't get 10 people on the internet to say the words senior executive service, because if they did and they simply looked it up in Wikipedia, they would throw up their hands and say, well, why do people give a nondescript name of the deep state? This isn't the deep state. This is a plan that's been going on for over 100 years. We know the players. We know their bank accounts. We know everything about them. We know more about them than they know about themselves, because they too, in many ways, are duped by their own press releases. They actually believe this nonsense that they're propagating. And the war in America, the American Revolution, was actually a war between the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company. And when the Dutch were then kicked out of New York and it was just the British East India Company, We never won the American Revolution. Britain has always been in control, and that's what caused our first banks to be created, British interests. That's what caused basically the first war after the
Yeah, the
American
first four
Revolution.
banks.
First four banks. And then later in 1913, they created the US Federal Reserve, which is simply British bankers. And now it's no longer British bankers. They've dodged the bullet, and they hide behind asset management companies. So who is managing our debt right now? That would be BlackRock. And then also Vanguard and State
Street.
They own everything. So when Silicon Valley Bank went down, let's just remember this. Who's the biggest investor? Those three companies. And who is managing our debt management with the Federal Reserve now? BlackRock. So it can't be any more corrupt. There is no way to take this to court because all these things are perfectly legal because the federal government has passed laws. For instance, people don't understand that the all preparedness and pandemic laws, which have been ratified 4 times over, gave all of our sovereignty to the World Health Organization and the United Nations. We have no American sovereignty left. We don't even charge taxes to the biggest companies who rip us off and run the psyopses that control our lives. And unfortunately, they don't either. These are demons, Jeff. These are demons. We can name the demons: Asmodeus, Leviathan. We can name Lucifer. We can name Ahriman, Satan. We can name all the people that they wittingly or unwittingly worship. And that's what we are really fighting. We are fighting against literally hierarchical beings.
Principalities and powers.
And dominions, principalities, powers, they have fallen. These are fallen, what we'd call angelic hosts. And you can't even confront them because they're invisible, and they can appear and drive the motivation of an infinite amount of people at once. So how many people worship money at this point? How many people worship these demons? That's what we're fighting against. And so how can you win it? To make sure that you understand that no demon can ever enter anyone without that person asking the demon to enter them. All these people we've named, many of them are demonically possessed, unfortunately, and they may or may not know it, but one thing's for certain: they begged those demons to enter into them as they became their servants. And so when they signed in blood, that's the very blood that the pharmaceutical World War III pandemic is trying to annihilate. And mind you, none of them get any vaccinations, but they're invested in every vaccination company. And they are, in fact, the people promoting it because they wish to annihilate all the people that they don't want on the earth, what they call indigent populations, or what they also call their economic slaves.
That's a lot to take in. And yet, the sulfuric bridges in the DNA spell out the name of God, Yahweh. The Christos comes down through the brain. So they have corrupted the system, and I can see all of that, and it certainly fits. But I always want to talk about solutions as well. And I say all the time, we've never been a republic. The founders hated democracy. We're supposed to be a republic, but our republic has fallen. And that's the mission statement, is to rescue the republic. But I think you have an idea of it's all got to fall so that we can reestablish it. Is that where you guys are going with your solution here?
Yes. Plus, the other deal is every good thing you do, it's never wasted, but it doesn't go into the world. Has anyone ever noticed that? It goes to other people. And those other people, through the love that you give them, build the future world. So we are building a future world, but we can't build it if we're under the stress of slavery and domination, whether it be through electromagnetic frequency emanations of 5G, whether it be banking usury, whether it be a pharmaceutical World War III. The point is, none of that actually affects your higher spiritual being, your Christ and self, and when you do a good thing, as we're doing right in this conversation now, we are building the future. And if you have faith in that, then you will be able to muster the love, even in this age that people would call the end of days or tribulation or whatever part of the apocalypse you wish to associate it with, because we are certainly in an apocalypse. The point is that what did the apocalypse tell us? We're building New Jerusalem. We are preparing our own soul as the bride of Christ, as the bride of the Lamb, and we rise up. New Jerusalem doesn't come to the earth. We're not going to turn this earth that has been basically turned into a lack of civilization. They call it civilization? No. If you're still at war with your neighbor, or countries between countries, or bankers against the rest of us, that's not civilization. But in your own soul, in your own spirit, we have a civilized Christian being that we all need to tap into that is the antidote. But in the end, we're still going to have to go back when we ascend. We're still going to have to go back and bring these very demonic beings. We try to bring them into the light because at this point they're going into animal kingdom. They're animals. They're not going into the kingdom which we're supposed to turn into, the realm of angels.
Well, let me give one example right now. They're having Twitter hearings in Congress, and they're discussing Twitter's bad behavior and what they need to do about that to correct those problems. But think about it from a standpoint of sin. Twitter is infringing my patent. Therefore, the entire foundation of Twitter is evil. They're discussing, but look what's happened. Congress has assumed the base foundation that Twitter exists and won't address the theft of social media at all. So they jump another level up and they say, well, we got all these bad guys and we're going to discuss their behavior and we're going to slap them on the wrist here and we're going to say they're doing good stuff there. And, you know, Elon Musk is giving us some stuff and okay. So once they win, once we discuss their activity at the level of another layer of sin. And so the question is, can that ever then convert to something good? And I think logically the answer is no. You can't build a good house on a bad foundation. And yet that's what we do with so many activities in our lives is we haven't really gotten down to the base level and said, okay, can we depend on a sinful institution to do good things? And so back to your answer, what's it going to take? I think it's going to take some sort of moral crash. That's just my opinion.
So since you are so scripturally literate, certainly scripture is just becoming so accurate in so much detail, the mark and everything. And it looks like maybe it's the first horseman or second, first horseman, crown, corona, arrows, jabs. It certainly looks like all of that is being fulfilled in detail. And I say this all the time, you got to study scripture, you got to study history to see what's really going on here in detail. And in my opinion, I talked about the revolutionary strategies of early Christianity to outlove the Romans, where you could not outfight them. I think we're in a very similar situation now to that. But here's something I want to ask is, so as an intelligence officer, I like to triage my enemies. And so I've said in the past that China is our major nation state enemy because they are a nation state. And they came out with the unrestricted warfare doctrine 20 years ago, and they're executing it fine. And that's working good. But I've also talked about the non-nation state global cabals, Pilgrim Society. But I have said they work through, for example, in Ukraine. Ukraine, to me, was the inflection point for the global cabal, or forgive me, the Pilgrim Society. But I have triaged the nation state of China as the more formidable enemy rather than the global enemies, the transnationalists. But it sounds like to me it's the other way around from your point of view, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, in doing these deep dives we've done, what we've discovered is that China is a creation of the British, and has been since the early 1800s and probably before that, because China was a whipping boy for British trade for hundreds of years. The British East India Company milked that country for everything it was worth, and then we said, okay, well, as we moved into the last century, did that change? And the short answer is no. And what we discovered to our surprise in digging into Boris Johnson's history, his great great grandfather founded the YMCA. And then we move YMCA forward, which occurred after the British gave up their black and brown slaves. And then we began to see, oh my gosh, these people created the Salvation Army and the YMCA as a way to create white and yellow slaves. And to test that, we started looking at what the YMCA did in China, and then we see they built these magnificent swimming pools and facilities all over China. Now, where'd they get the money for that? They got it from their banks. And then we started looking at the details of the formation of the Chinese YMCA, and lo and behold, we discover that was where Mao Zedong got his beginnings. And that we already knew that the British were basically the ideological founders of communism in all its forms. And then we started realizing that Mao Zedong was a British operation. And then we discovered documents that prove that Mao Zedong was taking his instruction from the British through Moscow after the 1917 revolution. So what we now see is that it doesn't matter which communism we're looking at, it all goes back to London. And we have actually proven that Lenin was being trained by the Pilgrims. The guy who did that was at the First Imperial Press Conference. So all of a sudden, this whole story of China, China, China starts to change when we realize they're another whipping boy that's hiding about one or two layers, the Pilgrim Society, who is really driving the bus. I also, in studying some of the more recent activities of the British, discovered that all the banking software in China was built in Britain. So the British are very good at hiding the Pilgrim Society behind 2 to 4 layers of other activities, so you never see them. The Rothschilds are always in the back room with all their buddies within the Pilgrim Society. They call themselves Jewish and hide behind anti-Semitism, but in fact, they're Babylonian pagans.
Our policy with China
and
was developed.
That ties in really well with the Babylonian Talmud, which is not Torah. The Pharisees become rabbis. The rabbis promote Talmud, which is not Torah at all. Yeshua talks about that, is when they're in the Moses seat, they can only read from Torah. That's good. But everywhere else, no, don't pay any attention to them. And that's
don't forget
really,
Yiddish.
That's an analogy.
Don't forget
That too,
Yiddish.
yes.
They created Yiddish at the same time. That was a trading language. This goes back to the Silk Road. And in the Silk Road, these Jewish bankers that were Babylonian were taking and running the trade for a bunch of nations across the Silk Road, from China all the way to England. They were stationed everywhere. And they were handling the spy business, the propaganda business, the banking business, the currency business, slave trading, opium trading, you name it. They were running the businesses of nations. That's where the Khazarians fit in, by the way, but that's kind of a side issue. This Khazarian mafia thing is a misdirection. It's not the Khazarians were a part of it, but they didn't drive it. This was coming out of Babylon the entire time. And the Babylonians the Babylonian Radhanites cut a deal with the Khazarians when the Seljuk Turks were taking over Babylon, and they had to move their banking operation out of Babylon. They renamed themselves Ashkenazi Jews. They cut a deal with the Khazarians so they could have a northern route of the Silk Road into Europe, which is what they did and why the Khazarians went along with it. But no, the Khazarians have never driven this bus. It's always been the Babylonian Radhanites who have been arrayed across Europe for several thousand years. And in my belief, they cut the deal with these Christian kings and queens when in fact they were all Babylonian Radhanites. And then they brought in the court Jews so they could have this surface excuse for charging interest because it wasn't a Christian thing to do. But secretly they were all cutting deals with each other. That's what we think.
Our court Jew was Henry Kissinger, who also is a Pilgrim, who also is in all the bad groups.
Big time Pilgrim.
And he was, of course, the leader of our CFR. And what is that? That is a British extension of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. And the CFR, what did he tell people? He said, we need to proliferate nuclear weapons so that America can control the world. He says there could only be one superpower. Not long ago, he started preaching that China was the new superpower. And what happened then was the Clintons went over, opened up the trade till pretty soon China was manufacturing every one of our household appliances. And to this day, it was only when Trump came into his office, the White House, that we stopped the Chinese complete control of all digital, economic, and manufacturing control of America. So follow the evil ones. Kissinger put all of his money banking that, and he went to China, was involved with China very deeply, just like Eric Schmidt. Follow Eric Schmidt and you'll follow the current evil. Follow Kissinger and you'll see the past evil. And then, of course, Kissinger promoted the policy of clash of nations. There can only be one superpower, and all other nations must be in war with each other so that then the superpower can have control. Well, that's just about what happened with China. But unfortunately, all kinds of the British said, no, we can't let that happen. So through the Pirbright Institute that moved to China, through the Muriel Animal Hospital that moved to China, and through their super secret organization that pretty much controls all intelligence in the Western Hemisphere and pretty much the world, Kinetic, they moved to China, and then they set China up for the third or fourth time by releasing viruses there and blaming it on China.
And by the way, Kinetic's first director was Glenn Youngkin, who is now governor of Virginia.
So you leave the military, and then you join a British organization that has control of the world. But isn't that what all of the evil ones in America do? Just look, they all get a knighthood. They all get the Order of the British Empire. They go to Malta.
George Tenet became a director of Kinetic in 2006.
And George Tenet was basically in charge of our foreign intelligence all over the world, which is really the war fomenting weapon of whatever nation it is that is in control. And at this point, the Pilgrim Society, the British, believe that America is no longer in control. They are in control. And just take, for instance, their offshore accounts. Their offshore accounts hold 65% of the wealth of America. No taxes were ever paid on it. So our court system, our federal government, that is a form of British aristocracy where they cannot be prosecuted. You cannot fire a member like the previous, the one who followed Comey, the head of the FBI. Of course, he was prosecuted, found guilty, and nothing happened. The very people who were involved in the overthrow of Trump, they were prosecuted. One guy went to jail for 2 weeks. That's it. So when you have the greatest corruption in front of your face, you have to look deeper to find out that it is not even coming from Americans. It's coming from dual citizenship Brits or people who are kowtowing to the Brits as crown agents here in America.
Who are possessed by Babylonian pagans.
Let me be clear for our audience is we're not talking about Judaism. We're talking about Zionism. We're differentiating.
We're not even talking about Zionism.
Okay, well, we're
those
talking
are
about
creations. Those were creations of the Pilgrim Society. They had to find an excuse for having Britain militarily back in the Middle East. That was the reason for Zionism. It was a British creation of these. Now we used to think they were Jews, but now we know they're Babylonian Radhanites who pretend to be Jews. And they're the bankers. They're the money, and they just continually rotate their presence. And they have discovered that pretending to be Jews is good for business. And so they created the Anti-Defamation League at the formation of the Federal Reserve, because this was a propaganda outfit This is what they did, and they knew they could hide behind Judaism and keep the Christian world at bay through that propaganda mechanism. Nothing to do with being Jewish.
Okay. And Douglas, I'm sure as a fellow veteran, as you're talking, I was thinking about the scene from The Best Years of Our Lives, where the guy's talking about at the counter, and the Army Air Corps guy punches him, and then the paratrooper who plays a sailor in The Best Years of Our Lives picks up the American pin because he's lost 400. So we're not denigrating Jews, and we're not denigrating veterans at all.
No.
We are just saying we have been psyoped and fooled,
Exactly.
all of us, and we're learning. And to me, their cover is their concealment, but they are losing cover and concealment at ever faster ratios. They are being reduced much, much more quicker. So we are winning this. We are beginning to win this because they're losing cover. Because again, talking about turning the Claymore around, the stolen technology is allowing us here to talk about this and propagate this. That's why I'm still on Twitter, because I'm turning it around on them as well. So do you agree with that?
I call it riding the Nazi train. We're using the Nazi train against them.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Or we're bringing the scum into the.
They want to keep their logistical systems, and we're going to piggyback on their systems in the resistance. Yes, I understand that completely. That makes excellent sense.
The Nazis stole my. And I call them Nazis because we've got to realize they're fascists, and they're teamed with the banks, and that's who we're fighting. And we now know they have a demonic foundation that has nothing to do with Christianity. And I think that's the challenge that Christians have is we're taught to love other people. We're taught to give them the benefit of the doubt. But in this case, we can't do that. We've got to acknowledge that these are not moral people. These are demons, and that's who we're fighting. And so we have to up our game of discernment, especially in order to understand what's going on. And so many of us are caught in these eddies of misdirection, of propaganda misdirection, which is very intentionally pushed on us. I can't, if I hear the hammer and scorecard thing another time, I think I'm going to throw up, because that is a propaganda story that was pushed. LifeLog's another one, total made up story, but it throws people off because they don't know it. Technology. What do you do with software? You can't see it.
Discernment is the most important thing we must learn at this point. And if you develop discernment and you bring into light this scum, this mold, this disgusting black rot, what will happen? Sunlight, Christ, will shine upon it, and it will simply die because no one believes in it anymore. Look at all that's happening with social media aspects of it. People have had enough of it. At this point, if they try to push us into the credit system that Eric Schmidt developed for China called Dragonfly, which we're already in, but if they try to close it down with IDs that control everything, that have all your information on them, or the Treasury digital currency, America will not stand for it, because they understand the scum is there. But when it comes personally into their life, into their own banking, into their own ability, because you can't exist without a bank in America. You can't exist practically without a license in America. So you have to give over a lot of your soul to the company. And the company at this point is the company of demons. But if you, in fact, simply deny it, and if you don't use it, it will die of obsolescence.
Very true. So we connect through the Christ to our Father in heaven, beyond the walls of space-time. And then we get the fruit of the gifts of the Spirit, which are discernment and deliverance. And I think that's happening more and more. I see people leaving pedo public schools and commie big church. And I also think that's why they're so obsessed with going after Russia, is because the Russian Orthodox Church, with all its faults, is still a connection to God. And there's a national and spiritual connection there, which has been severed in America. The first Bibles in America were published by Congress for public schools, for moral education and grammar. And that's why they're so obsessed. So in this area, I think that Russia is an ally of us, not a friend. But when I say ally, I mean like an informant. Like I put an
No,
informant in the
I agree.
gang.
I agree with you. I took gospel music groups into the Soviet Union during the Brezhnev era. I got one of my groups on the official Olympic film in 1980. I know a lot about Russia, and it's possible Vladimir Putin frisked me at the Leningrad airport in 1972. And I'm being literal. This whole issue of I'm actually Eastern Orthodox now. So I think you're right that in God's economy, things happen for a reason at different seasons of our lives. And so what I'm real clear about, and Douglas and I have somewhat of a friendly disagreement about Putin, but I don't know. I don't know what's in his heart, but I do know that he is making, he is trying to bring to the public's awareness that these moral failings that he sees in the West are not things he wants to allow in Russia. And to the extent that that is his decision, I commend that. But I do know a lot of people in the Soviet Union, and there are a lot of in Russia, and there are a lot of godly people who are praying daily, as there are in America.
KGB, and he says there's no ex-KGB, and I don't think he's a good guy. I just think he's an ally because I think Ukraine is the inflection point representing the Pilgrim Society global cabal,
Exactly.
and they're losing because third generation warfare defeats fifth generation warfare, and their whole scam is collapsing, like the whole COVID jab thing as well. All of their things are scams, and you're just elaborating on that. Well, I do want to ask one more question before we wrap, and that is the Templars. So the Templars established the first banking system, but was that without usury? They did not have any usury involved. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And they did that after the First Crusade. And Raymond of St. Giles, who was the leader of the force into Jerusalem, was in charge, set that up. And then within maybe 100 years, the Pope took it over because he cut a deal with the Babylonian Radhanite bankers. And I think a lot of people are confused with the Vatican's role here. And I think that we have to realize that there was another Babylonian force that was taking charge of different aspects of the Roman Church. By the way, Douglas is a former Jesuit priest. And that's a whole nother story. But he has a deep perspective of that. But I took our gospel music group, none of us were Roman Catholics, to Rome and had an audience with Pope John Paul II because we had worked with him in Poland over a decade of time. So I'm not anti-Catholic, but I do see the role that the Vatican Bank has played in a lot of these things, but it's all Babylonian Radhanites. It's not Rome that's running this deal. And basically Queen Victoria and the Rothschilds in the late 1800s formed something called the Knights of Malta English Priory, and that was the way these pilgrims got control of the Vatican Bank. So since the turn of the last century, the Vatican Bank has not been driving this bus at all. It's just coming all out of the City of London.
Well, Douglas, I'm a product of rape out of St. Joseph's Catholic Orphanage, adopted by a great Christian family, went to Summit Country Day in Cincinnati, which is a Catholic school with the Sisters of Notre Dame, and then went to St. Xavier High School. So I'm not Catholic now, but I certainly have an appreciation for, the institutions and the good nuns that, there's good in there in that system. And we have to realize that it's not, it's a sophisticated array to understand really what's going on.
Right.
But this has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm going to have to ask if you guys can come back on so that we can discuss this more. Douglas, tell your wife I'm catching up as fast as I can. I'm doing my best. I'm trying hard. But I will. I encourage everybody to go to American intelligence media and check out Michael and Douglas, and also the CAT reports at the Christians Addicted to Truth, because that's really how we are going to win this. But it's not going to be fun, and it's going to require a lot more blood and sacrifice than we've ever realized before. But I'll give you guys the final words as we close.
Well, I'll start off. In the military, I found out one thing: Russia was not our enemy. We gave them the technology so that we could stay in a Cold War with them, and that also happened with Raytheon. We built a Raytheon factory for them in Sokolov. That's why
Hillary did that.
Hillary did this. So, she went into China and she made our biggest enemy in control of all of our manufacturing. And then she went into Russia and basically gave them not only more nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants, which we actually built uranium enrichment plants for them. Just astounding that people want to call them our enemy. But what happened was, Putin isn't playing the game. Putin was a member of the World Economic Forum, but I don't think he's playing their game anymore. So he's thrown a monkey wrench into the works. But one thing's for sure: if we're still at war anywhere on the face of the earth, we aren't civilized human beings. And so if they want to play the game to make money by using war, then all of the people who stand against that are going to stand against them.
Yeah, and I think that this current banking crisis, totally fabricated, totally designed as a propaganda ploy for them to rearrange their assets on the Titanic. And hopefully the Titanic is sinking because as more and more people become aware of the Babylonian Rhodonite demon possession that drives these people, I think it will help with the perspective. And I think that what we've got to do is stop saying deep state and shadow government and start naming names. We need to name the names of the people who run Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan and BlackRock, State Street, Blackstone, which is another big one, and Vanguard. And we've got to start focusing on those individuals, because they're demon possessed, but we need to get them out of our lives.
And there's no real value there. There's no real value in anything. So their currency is empty. Their capacity of their currency has nothing in it.
They've created all these mutual funds that a lot of people have their 401ks tied up with. And I'm sure they're creating a lot of fear right now in people who know they're holding Vanguard or Fidelity or BlackRock or all these investments, and they're afraid they'll lose them all. And so they've done a very thorough demonic job. This isn't a human being we're dealing with. We're dealing with a demon who's very clever about how to engulf people in fear. And I think what we need to do as Christians is recognize that Jesus had a simple answer for this demon, and it's to tell the demon to get behind him. And we need to start telling the demon to do that and purifying our lives so that we're operating out of a foundation of love.
Very well said. I often talk about the seduction of evil through oppression, obsession, infection, infestation into possession, versus the process of sanctification. And that is through Yeshua HaMashiach. So
Amen,
thank you so much. So remember to fear not, God bless, keep the faith, and hold fast. We are winning. This is what winning looks like. But freedom is never given. It must be earned, fought for, and taken. So take it.
Thank you, Jeff.